Welcome to Whiteboard Wednesday. I'm Scott Lokers, part of the Luminex team. I want to ask you to think with me for a few minutes about mental models. We're thinking about leading at a time when we don't know exactly where we are going. And something that's powerful for me, and I'm trying to learn and to grow in this skill, is thinking about mental models. Perhaps you've seen this before, maybe not. This is what we refer to sometimes as a change pyramid, or as important part of systems as we think systems. And if you're wondering about all of these parts, let me refer you to another Whiteboard Wednesday. John Messer did one. It's in our archives about this entire pyramid, and it's excellent, and look it up if you need a refresher. But as we think about mental models, the reason I want us to think about it is this is the place where we believe transformation happens. And if we're thinking about growing, about transforming, we get to a mental model level. Let me just share a definition of mental models. Mental models are simply a set of beliefs and assumptions that we have about how the world works and how I would take effective action in it. A set of beliefs and assumptions about how the world works and how I take action. And mental models can serve us really well. They're a bit like a shortcut. We don't have to think through everything that happens in our lives about how do we respond appropriately. A simple example, I have a headache. I don't have to think that all the way through. So what would I do about a headache? What does it even mean that I have a headache? How would I respond effectively? We just know. I'll go take some Tylenol. They can serve us well. But they can also hold us back, because there are sometimes we think that's just the way the world is, but it's actually a mental model. Let me give you an example. This might be silly to you, but for a lot of years, so I'm a preacher, for a lot of years I had a mental model that I would show up to preach always in a suit and a tie. Always in a suit and tie. Never preached without a suit and a tie on. You say, why would I do that? Well, I thought that's just what you did. Those were examples I had in my life. But I came to realize after a while, no, that's actually a mental model that I inherited from my father. My father had the idea that as you're preaching, you want to show respect for the Word of God. And how do you show respect? Well, in his mind, the way you do that is you show up in a suit and a tie. I came to realize, well, that's true for my dad and for some others, but that's a mental model. And other people have other mental models. And I came to find out that sometimes if you show up in a suit and tie when you're wanting to share the Word of God, it's not helpful. In fact, it gets in the way. Some people won't even listen because you show up in a suit and tie. It is a mental model. And I believe part of what God is up to in this time, as it seems like so many things are getting turned on their heads, He's inviting us to surface our mental models and to examine them and to take a look at, so what really is objective truth and what is a mental model? So let me give some examples. So many of us have had the mental model I have about what's the most important thing that a church does. Well, the most important thing a church does is Sunday morning worship. And then a pandemic hits, and we can't do it the way we did it. People cannot gather for worship. And we've got to think, all right, is worship not important? Or is worship can it only be done in the way that we've done it? And we start to surface that this is actually a mental model. The way we do worship, many of us, it's a set of beliefs and assumptions. And they're actually, as we surface the mental model and examine it, we start to figure out, actually, there are all kinds of ways that we can do worship. Or we start to think, what is it? What's the glue that holds a congregation together? Or how do we think about our parish? So let me give you the example. A young woman that I know, and she was part of a congregation. She loved it. She's involved. She's serving. She's growing. And then she moves across country. And she's looking for a church like the one she left, and she can't find one, and she's not feeling like she's part of something. And then the pandemic hits. And she realizes, you know what? I can be tied to the congregation I left that's 2,000 miles away. So she's watching the worship online. Not only that, she's figuring out how to do relationships 2,000 miles away. This congregation started to think creatively and say small groups matter to us and relationships matter to us, and so we're going to form new groups virtually. And she has a chance to stay connected. And we find out that we think, well, it's just the way the church was, that we have to be face to face. Well, actually, no, perhaps that's a mental model, and God is inviting us to surface our mental models, to examine them, and to be creative with how we might respond and how we might design something else. So let me give you one more. So, pastor, what's a mental model of a pastor? And many of us have had the mental model or a leader, that the leader has all the answers. I've got everything up here and I know what to do. And in a time when everything's getting turned on its head, might God be inviting us to surface that and say, oh, maybe in this time, the way you are an effective leader is to ask good questions and to admit, I don't have all the answers, and can we work on this together, and can we experiment? Again, we're trying to live into this with Luminex. So I work primarily in transition ministry, and I've been thinking a lot, praying a lot, talking with colleagues a lot about how much of what I believe about transition ministry, what is important, how much of that is really true, and how much of that is a mental model. And might there be other ways that we can do this more effectively? And might God be inviting us as a transition team to surface our mental models, to examine them, and to experiment with how we might be more fruitful, more effective as we turn the corner here? Thanks.